I'm in the publishing industry, I'd say now for 25 years. I went out to Hungary in 1992. I got involved in launching Hungary's first independent newspaper. So I started off in independent journalism, but I came through the advertising side. After 5 years of working in business publishing, our business was basically expanded into Poland, into Czech, and we were funded by Microsoft prepaying their advertising. So we started our business with $80,000. And brought independent business news to post-communist countries. But it was serious stuff, and this was prior to the launch of magazines like Cosmo and National Geographic. And when those magazines started to, look around the Central European markets, I got very fascinated by lifestyle publishing, so I took the leap into lifestyle publishing and became the MD of Cosmopolitan magazine, and then went on to launch FHM, National Geographic, and a whole slew of magazines. So I was on the other side of the licensing model. So for example, I was looking to license Top Gear in 2006, 2007, and I was out in India with all of these great, UK cars, basically, with Miss India for these big photo shoots that they were doing for Top Gear. Those were in the days prior to the recession that basically totally transformed the publishing industry. So that's me. You can see a little bit more. I've been a CEO basically for 20 years, and in the last couple of years I've been working on a startup project in the language services area. I just want to ask you a question. When you book online, you book in English, right? Now, if your native language was French and you were booking on booking.com, you'd be booking in French, right? So do you know that booking.com is available in 44 languages? So when you are going into the world of the internet, you go through this access point, which is your native language, but actually what's happening under the hood, so to speak, is happening in multiple languages. In fact, there's 6,000 languages in the world, and today you can produce content very easily in 130 of those simultaneously. So what's my inspiration? So basically, after many years of Cosmo, and this is a personal story, I was, sitting there working at Marquardt Media as CEO. I had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old. My highlights were grown out. My electricity bill wasn't paid. And, I thought my husband was the worst person I could ever possibly have married because he totally was not supportive. And I sat there with the ex-editor of Cosmo, and I said, is your life as crap as mine? Because all those things that we told those Cosmo girls, this must be wrong. We need to make another brand that services women's true needs in this kind of new version of life, which is this extended version of yourself that happens when you stop focusing on your career and yourself and you start focusing on your family and building the world around you. So we created a brand, and this was in 2005 in Hungarian language. I speak Hungarian fluently, called Ava. And this was, for me as an Irish person who speaks Hungarian and speaks some Polish and also works in the Czech language, I've always been publishing in foreign languages. And, I was motivated basically not necessarily by the language, that just happened to be the way the advertising market worked, So, you sell in Hungarian, you buy from Hungarian customers, you sell to Hungarian readers. But at the end of the day, I was always reading all of these UK magazines and inspired by them. And when I was thinking about Ava and when we created her, we were profitable in 5 months with Ava. We actually launched PDF first and digital magazine on Zinio. If you remember Zinio, remember those days? And I was like, okay, God, if only I could just kind of go into other languages, it would be easier, because the CPTs in a Hungarian local market, they were so low. It was very hard to make some decent money. We were always on the edge. It was always issue to issue. We always had to make money. We had to be break even plus. But, I thought if only I could expand the reach, and get out of this Hungarian language thing, this would be ideal. So I'm going to skip this for the moment, but let me just say that as a CEO, when you're running a company and you see a collision coming, like what happened in 2008, like our advertising revenue started to drop exponentially. My husband, I mentioned at the beginning, was in recruitment in 7 countries. Turnover dropped 70% in 6 weeks after the collapse of Lehman Brothers. I came back on the 6th of January 2009 and had to fire 30% of my company, because we simply wouldn't have made it till May from a cash flow point of view if we didn't do that. And we decided at that time that we were going to go against the market, and we launched InStyle so that we could take market share at that time, so that we could survive. And we decided to get extremely aggressive in terms of taking as much of money from the market as possible. That was our only objective. But we were still limited by language. We couldn't go beyond, because in licensing, what Tim said, in each country you have a local partner. All these licensing agreements, they're limited by distribution and they're limited by language. So you can't suddenly decide to have an InStyle and then start publishing it in Polish and Czech. If you have a Hungarian license, you are stuck in Hungarian language. This was a boundary that was just very oppressive. Anyway, I got this reputation as being really good at restructuring companies really quickly and keeping things alive that should be dead. But but still this thing in my head about where's the technology to make it happen? I mean, look at this, technology is eating the world. That's what Mark Andreessen said, from Sequoia Capital. I thought, if only I could think like a technology company. Like I see, technology companies going global. How can they do it and we're not doing it as publishers? What's stopping us from doing this? So it actually happened just by chance that I was speaking to a guy from a localization company. Now, localization is translation, but really what it has grown with, localization has grown with the speed of the deployment globally of technology companies. So every time you download a website, if you go and you look under the little language icon, you see that it's in multiple languages. You go onto eBay, you go onto Netflix, all that's translation behind it. Everything that you see, it's translated. All those translation memories are saved. 90% of that translation is automated. It's not even human people who are doing it anymore, it's machine created. Now, the thing about this, and I put it like this because I looked into this localization when a friend of mine started to say to me, oh, well, Google is asking us to do transcreation. And I'm like, what's transcreation? Oh, they want us to translate holiday reviews into 26 languages. Now, this is somebody, I won't mention the company, but it's an MMLV, a massive multilingual vendor. They sell and produce translations in 140 languages. And normally, they might do it for technical documentation, for legal, for patents, for install books, for Microsoft, whatever. But all of a sudden, I saw there was this convergence where obviously the internet needs more content and more languages. Google needs it for PageRank. I started to say, okay, but if you're doing transcreation, it's like taking this created content and recreating it for a local market. That's writing. That's our job. That's our job. You're in our space if you're doing this. And when I found out how much money they were being paid for it, I was just blown away. I said, I'll do it for half the price, But I realized when I went into localization, I realized that it's female-led, lovers of language, globally minded, technology-enabled, and performance-driven. And I look at me as a publisher in my little Hungarian kind of like outpost, and it's like female-led, lovers of language, locally minded, totally technology incapable, and not performance-oriented. And I thought if I could merge these two things together, maybe I could take my original idea of Ava and make her available in multiple languages. This was my thinking. Along came the iPad, and I had my first chance to break out of the distribution model, which was limiting me, which was with paper, and I decided to publish in Hungarian, German, and English. And it was an unmitigating disaster. The content was basically all about Easter eggs. Who would have thought that it could be so intrinsically personal? But it just didn't sound right. I couldn't understand what was the problem until I researched it more, and I realized that for effective translation, you need to start in English, because the corpuses of translation text that are most broadly available in terms of language pairs. It doesn't matter if it's English to Farsi, English to German, English to Finnish. If you have to go through English, which is why being here, and which is obviously why Tim and I, when we were discussing this, the English language is so important to effective machine translation. It's really something, if you're thinking about your niche brand, like I hear these guys out there thinking, or like stylists today, I'm thinking, if Ryanair went from one language to 16 language with the switch of a light bulb, basically, and became a global player in the cheap flights business with that one move, and I know the guy who did it, for them, then why not think about yourself as a publisher in more than one language? You don't need to be localizing, you just need to take your brilliance and basically make it accessible to other people. So you know, I've often believed that paper is a quality guarantee, only because we sit down and we really reflect about the emergent needs of our readers. And there are so many brands, let's say like Flow, like our brand, like Women's Health, or like this is a magazine in Dutch, actually, I picked up at the kiosk about Ibiza for Dutch people. And it's all about Ibiza, but I'd love to read what's being said in this magazine. In fact, one of the most amazing insights I had as a publisher was when I was speaking to the original CEO, Arnaud, of Psychologie magazine, when I wanted to license it in Poland. And I said, so what should we be doing with Psychologie? And he was like, should it be more like the English psychologies? And he goes, no, because that's more mainstream. It should be like the French, because that's more Freud. He went on and he translated the French Psychologie into English for me. I read it and I realized, wow, now I understand French women so much more. I didn't even realize that women could have these questions in their mind. It enabled me to actually have a deeper understanding of the narrative, the social narrative that was going on in a foreign language, and adapt then my Polish edition, my prototype, to meet those needs. So the translation enables you to not just basically take your content and make it deployable in other countries and languages digitally, but you're also able to get access to great storylines and ideas from other places. So I say think globally, and this was on you were saying think globally, and I'm not going to talk about the monetization or, you know, turning a $100 million business into a $10 million business like most technology companies. You know, they replace 100 jobs with one, or $100 million in turnover with, you know, a tenth of that. I just want to open your minds to the fact that if you have editorial brilliance in your content, and you want to make that accessible in multiple languages today, it's completely feasible technically and also financially. And if you think globally, like for example, it's very hard to see this, but this is Outfittery, which is actually a service for men. It's a styling service for men. They're in multiple languages. And this I can't even see, this is ASOS. It's ASOS Marketplace, that they produce content because they need the content for their e-newsletters, they need the content for their marketing, they have their own little bookazines as well. ASOS, you can see, or even with Booking.com, 44 languages. That's all done through this method of localization that I was mentioning. And if you take Porter, and this is, let's say, something that we can all understand, everybody was really jubilant when Net-a-Porter went into the print business, and it was like an affirmation that you need to have, you know, your content in this tangible, touchable format like paper. They're in 4 languages on the web with Porter magazine. So what I would say in relation to the balancing is to, you know, how to balance this local and global mindset. Your content, it's really pretty much the same idea, that your content narrative has to be opinion leading in its subject matter. You need to put your readers first and think in niche content. We're not talking about here, you know, generic content or local gossip. We're talking about very much niche content. Pick your content and be the undisputed champion and authority in that, and pick the world's best editors around that topic. The internet, I said, has become a black hole for publishers, and we've lost our opinion leading status. And I believe that's because we don't think like technology companies, because technology companies wake up in the morning and they need to think global to actually make it. We as publishers, we don't naturally think beyond this limitation, and I think that's our biggest mistake. And I think now, you know, as I said, I'm Irish. I've been pitching this idea to Enterprise Ireland in Dublin for Irish designers, Irish brands, and I'm saying you need to be thinking like about the Japanese who have only, you know, stories about Ireland, but they don't actually have any immediate experience. How can you take Irish brands to the Japanese marketplace? And how can you take your Irish hand-knit wools, you know, woolen outfits and scarves, which are selling for maybe 500, you know, pounds a piece, and you need to sell, if you're a small entrepreneur, you need to maybe sell 10, 15, 20 of them, but you need a high consumer purchasing power capability. For that, you need to find those 150 people and maintain dialogue with them, which means you need to be accessible in multiple languages. So what's the game changer? Now everybody thinks, oh my God, I've been told, people have said, don't you find translators boring? You know, they're just not as creative as us editors. It's so measurable, it sucks, you know, and all this sort of stuff. But I was just like, let me just tell you something that's game changing. In the past, translation was a no-no. I mean, I did Cosmopolitan, I did National Geographic, I did InStyle in 3 countries. So I know the licensing process inside and out, and I know what part of it is the magic sauce and what part of it is the basic cake. You know, and the basic cake in many magazines is the same no matter what language. You pull it from an FTP server, if it's a Scorpio astrology review, it doesn't matter if it's in Korean, Japanese or French, it's the same. If it's sex tips, if it's fashion, if it's how to pluck your eyebrows, it's not rocket science, most of the stuff that we write about in magazines. But at the end of the day, in the past, nobody looked at translation as being a value proposition, a part of it. They just sent it out to be translated and forgot about it. Now, in the meantime, our good friends at Google, who've been scanning in all of the books and using the widely available resources of the European Union's translation, freely accessible translation corpuses that they have created over the last 35 years, or even more since the advent of machine translation in the 50s, they have been using this databases to basically get access to constantly training and retraining the machine learning that is required for automated deployment of content. 5 years ago, to translate 1 million words, €250,000 using human translators. Today, using machine translation, 70. So anybody who wakes up in the morning with an idea of brilliance around the editorial topic, who doesn't think that I can reach 80% of the digital single market in 14 languages, is missing the point of the internet. Completely. So if there's one thing I would just say to you is get in your niche, be an expert in it, and think truly globally. Because you've got nothing to lose, yeah, by just, you've nothing to lose. And every time then you re-engineer you take your content and you translate it, you create your own knowledge repositories. And those knowledge repositories, as they grow and accumulate, they become the basis upon which you sow the seeds for your own machine learning, for your own automated content in the future. So I attached a little video here. It's a 15-minute video. It's some Korean dude talking about, I don't know, neural machine translation. It's highly complex, and I'm not going to bore you with it. But if you go onto the internet and you just download any video on neural machine translation, and I can assure you, I'm no mathematician, right? I just love fashion and beauty and stuff like this, but I'm obsessed with this because of Ava, because I just want, and I would like to pay my mortgage, as we were often discussing. So I'd like to stay gainfully employed for another period of time, and I figured, this is, after restructuring publishing companies, I really feel that I need to have a different shtick, something game-changing. And we talked about game-changing. Neural machine translation is game-changing.
I'll send that link on for you.
Huh?
I'll send that link on.
Do, please, send the whole thing, because, but I just want you to think about it differently, to understand that if you're on booking.com and they're available in 44 languages, then, and they're producing travel content, then, Jesus, we should be producing travel content in 44 languages. And if you're thinking about Brand Scotland or Brand anything, then please think that, you can actually reach other people in other countries with your content, and with that, you can multiply your audience exponentially. Exponentially, and that's where the big money is. And that's a game changer. But at the moment, of course, it's a bit like this, bit of a mess, That's how I feel when people say to me, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I kind of believe you just because I know you. But, which is why I'm here. So anyway, how to cross the chasm. I mean, this is a typical thing, but you know that suspension bridges, they were invented by the Incas. And I did some research on this because I was saying this to my parents, that I feel a little bit like I'm kind of running on the wrong side of the chasm. I'm trying to figure out how to get onto the other side. But on the other side, the people in localization, they want content. So they're very welcoming of me. I have an issue with the publishing industry who doesn't want to embrace translation technology because of the natural inclinations and evolutionary considerations that we've been, discussing maybe in the past. But what the Incas used to do was they get one guy on one side of the chasm to fire an arrow onto the other side. But there was a poor person that had to run down and go along the bottom and risk death and climb up the other side to be there to catch the arrow on the other side, or to be the person who would fire the arrow over. And the way I see this is a little bit like I'm the person who is kind of like got this idea and decided, okay, to hell with this, I'm going to jump over the side and I'm going to run down and I'm going to understand the narrative here. And so for 2.5 years, I've been working on this localization with the absolute profound belief that if on the other side you can actually match with people's needs and emergent needs, then you can create a storyline from which you can build this bridge. So it's great that you invited me here today, because I've been able to brainwash him now, I hope, as well. So anyway, I just decided to do a small little kind of like route to, it's like step by step, but you can get that. I mean, to me, the future is evergreen content. You have evergreen content. I mean, it's obvious: machine learning, artificial intelligence, automated content creation. I want to mention like 2 companies. Like, for example, there's a company called Acrolinks, or a company called Ad Semantics, who are already producing content today and deploying that content. I mean, when they talk about fake news, really most of the internet is machine generated. Like most of the weather reports, most of the sports results, most of the astrology, most of the daily news, everything, it's just machine created content. And it's very hard for us now to distinguish between really human-made content and machine-created content. We're still, I think, over-engineering ourselves too much. I think the future is going to be more about, virtual editorials and post-editing, so that we're validating, a bit like what the guy from The Atlantic said today, that the humans will be there to validate, is this truly properly sourced information? We will generate the ideas. We will use artificial intelligence to create new content around that, to explore all of the potential, just like it was transforming everything from medicine to technology. And I think it's probably over time might even move to print on demand, but that's maybe 5, it's already happening in the books business. I mean, with Amazon, it's all print on demand. So, brilliant brands, e-commerce and the digital single market. I just want to give you a sense. Like today, 7 million small to medium-sized enterprises are selling their services online, only 50% cross-border. And there's I don't know if it's relevant from the Brexit point of view, or maybe it's even more relevant than ever before, but to be able to get to the digital single market, you need to be able to do so using the languages of the people with whom you're planning to engage. If you are, let's say, producing a magazine about, let's say, I don't know, Scottish kilts, for example, or Scottish tweeds, that's extremely relevant in a global market context. To be able to manage yourself from an e-commerce point of view, you need to be more than just thinking about America or in English language. So obviously GDPR, I think that the America and the English language content coming from the US has had an unfair advantage in terms of being able to dominate the scene, especially in terms of taking so much of the advertising. Because Facebook and Google take 75 euro cents per every euro, and that pretty much screws up all the publishing industry, because licensees also rely on generating the money to cover their minimum guarantees from advertising. So in this model where advertising is depleting at an ever faster rate, I think that GDPR is leveling the playing field and making it easier for smaller publishers. And of course, the challenge is how to build editorials of the future so that the content that is created by us as publishers, we get money for in perpetuity, so that it's watermarked, both the content that we create and the content that we translate, that the originator of the idea, it's more like picture royalties. So the content should also be treated the same way, like you would if you were writing a book. So that human-created content is generating royalties in perpetuity for the generator of the content, the writer, at the very beginning. Okay, so there's a glossary of this is what I call a little word prompt and some useful links at the end. I'm not going to explain each and every one of them, but I think that if you just put them into Google, these are the most salient ones. They might kind of like get you thinking a little bit. If you've got friends who are translators, sit down, have coffee with them and ask them to explain to you how CAT tools, computer-assisted translation tools, work. Become familiar with it, because translation is going to be like a utility. It's going to be like electricity. It's not going to be the fact that it's there, it's going to be what you do with it. And translation is going to be the same. So you won't have to be limited by language. It's already there. It's just that it's not there for publishers yet. Okay? Thank you. Please keep in touch.